I don't know what it is about the combination of this sweater with this palette, but every time I have this sweater on and I reach into this palette, I feel like I have to absolutely wear this shade right here, and it is quickly becoming one of my favorite shades. Hey guys, thanks for coming back to check out another video. So I thought it would be really fun. I've seen the tag going around, the like A to Z makeup challenge, the alphabet makeup challenge. I'm not quite sure what the name is for it. And off the top of my head, I can't think of who created it. So Editing Haley will fix all of this and probably provide the name and everything, and it will be in the description box as well. But I've seen that and I thought it would be really fun to do that, but with all eyeshadows. So I'm picking my favorite shades A to Z. And it was really eye-opening because some of them you're kind of like forced into almost. Like I think I only have one shade in my collection that starts with a U. So it was kind of like, all right, well then that's my U shade. And others were like super tricky. Like S gave me the biggest problem, I think. So I just think this will be really fun. I filmed a swatch clip just before this so I can insert swatches and everything. But yeah, let's just check out my favorite shades A to Z. Okay, so kicking it off with A, my A shade comes from the BH Cosmetics Avocado Toast palette. If I open it up, you can probably guess which shade, but for A, I picked Avo Toast right there. That nice, like kind of army green shade. It's just such a pretty, like matte shade. I have a lot of like olivey kind of green shades in my collection, especially like in my singles, but the undertone of this I don't have at all, and so this really comes in handy. I just love wearing it. It's a great crease shade, definitely one of my favorites. Who's surprised that the first shade is a green shade? All right, so for the letter B, it actually comes from the Juvia's Place Warrior palette. This was a palette that I went back and forth on decluttering for a while because I own the Naked Honey, but I can't bear to part with it. I know they're so similar, but I absolutely love this palette. And now the background is pretty reflective, so I don't know if the camera will have a hard time like adjusting and things. But my B shade is this shade right here, which is pronounced Bakwa, if I'm not mistaken, Bakwa. But yeah, it's just this really pretty, like intense gold shade. I just absolutely love it. I think that it pairs really nicely with a variety of different things, not just like standard neutral colors, but I could see it pairing really nicely with like some purples and greens and like reds, and give you like some more interesting looks rather than just like using it in a standard neutral look. So that is the shade for B. All right, Juvia's Place is in here a lot because I have a lot of their palettes, but the shade for C actually comes from the Saharan 2, and I'm not about to try to pronounce this name and butcher it, so I will leave it on the screen for you, but it does start with a C. It is this like really pretty kind of like minty blue-green shade. I don't have anything like this in my collection, and that like my eye is always drawn to that shade within this palette. Like it would be probably my favorite shade within this palette. And I thought like that's another reason why this is kind of fun to do, because not every shade that I picked to correspond with the letter is necessarily like my favorite shade within the palette, but in this case it did work out to be that way. I just think this is such a pretty like shade. The palette as a whole, I don't really see a lot of cohesiveness to it, but I want to try to get better about using it as a standalone palette, but definitely that shade in particular, absolutely love. All right, if you've been here for a while, the shade that I picked for the letter D should come as no surprise to you. It is from DandyLions, and it is the shade Dahlia. I absolutely love this. When we did our singles tag collab, Laura and I both picked this out as our favorite eyeshadow single that we have. It is just a great like electric green, and I love describing it that way because it's a complete and perfect dupe for the electric shade within the ABH Subculture palette. And I really like their formula. It's nice. This performs so much better than electric does. Like if you own Subculture, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, no surprise, this is my D shade. Okay, so for the letter E, I picked from my Jackie Aina palette the shade Edges. Now I'm going to have to try to be strategic so that I don't show you the shade that's in the pan, those eyeshadows, but Edges is this shade right here. It is like this really interesting brown kind of pink color. Like, I feel like when you look at it just in the pan, it does read very much of like a almost like muddy kind of brick red brown, but depending upon what you pair it with, like today I have edges on with the color Supreme in my crease, and I just feel like a lot more of that like pink purple undertone comes out with it. This palette as a whole just always never ceases to amaze me. Like, every time I pull it out, I'm just like blown away by like the color combinations and just the creativity that it offers. So really happy that this palette also makes an appearance for some other letters too. All right, for F, it comes from my Saharan palette by Juvia's Place. I picked the shade Fula in here. Again, I gotta cover up my shade I'm working on, but it's this nice like bubblegummy pink shade. I don't wear these shades a lot on camera, but in my like daily life, like that is the shade where if I could just allow myself to play with whatever I wanted, like irregardless of project panning and things like that, it would be those like bubblegummy pink shades. I don't know why I'm so drawn to them, but I absolutely love them and like just can't get enough of them. So that is my F shade. All right, G was a little bit of a hard shade to decide, but once I finally like made the decision, like made the tiebreaker between the two, I was like, yeah, hands down, this has got to be my favorite shade. It is Glass Bull from ColourPop. I just absolutely love this. Now, mine has started to crumble a little bit, and I don't know if that's just due to age, but I don't find that it doesn't, like it still performs just as nicely as when I first got it. So, but it can be a little bit flaky, I think, just because of age. But I love this shade. It's like an interesting, like duochrome, and depending on what you pair it with, it either leans more purple or more blue. In my last like palette bingo, I used this shade as like the center when I was doing a halo eye, and it definitely pulled more of that like blue shade out of it because I had it paired with lithuatian. So this is just a great shade. I absolutely love using it, and it's perfect for like this time of year, like winter time. It's a go-to shade for me. All right, so for H, we are dipping back into the BH Avocado Toast palette. And the shade that I picked for H is the shade Haas right here. It is just like this great dirty green golden color. Like, I really think that's probably my favorite color within this palette. I absolutely love it. It's just, it works so beautifully, and I really love pairing it with some of the shades that are in my Subculture palette. Like, it just gives you such fall vibes, and especially using it with like yellows, oranges, and purples. It's an absolute like favorite shade of mine, and it does also make some really pretty looks within this palette too. But I just think it's such a like unique shade that it pairs so nicely with other things other than just like the greens that are in that palette. All right, for the shade I, this is coming in, oh, this is hard. Like, I used to think the Tribe was my favorite Juvia's Place palette, but then I got this guy, and I don't know, I love this, and I never hear anyone talk about this. So there's a few shades in here that made it into my alphabet challenge, but the shade I picked for I is Eerie G here, this like pink shade. And looking, like, I surprised myself. I did not think that I would pick that shade for any letter of the alphabet, but it's really become like a favorite shade, especially when I'm using this palette. It is just such a nice, like hot pink color, but if you blend it with like Oro here, for instance, you're able to like tone it down and things like that. I just realized I didn't hide Oro from you. That's in my pan, those eyeshadows. But either way, if you can like tone the hot pinkness of it down with the other shades in here. And I absolutely love just pulling this palette out and creating looks with it. Like, I don't think that it looks like it would be a super cohesive palette, but it really is if you give it a chance. So I just really love this. I'm so glad that like it's just performing as well as I thought it would in my head, because you know, sometimes you buy things and it's like, I really think this would be the greatest thing ever, and then you're like a little disappointed, like you've hyped it up too much in your own head. But I did not hype that up enough in my own head. All right, J was another shade that I was kind of like forced into. I don't have a lot of eyeshadow shades that start with the letter J, so the one I picked comes from the Nubian 2 palette by Juvia's Place. I picked the shade Jezebel here, and it is like this really pretty, like, I don't know, it's like, obviously it's like a purple, but the undertone of it is a little bit different than like just a standard like berry or just like dark purple shade. Like, it's really interesting. It almost matches like the color of my sweatshirt, so it's like a maroony purple, I guess. but it's so pretty. And I don't really have a lot of, one, I don't have a lot of purples, but two, especially a purple of that like kind of shade I don't have. And I really like using it in the outer V. I think it works really well. It blends out nicely. So that is my J shade. All right, for K, we are dipping back into the Saharan palette. I think this was so easy. Like when I sat down to think about the shades and look through my palettes, there were some letters that obviously just came like faster than others, and I didn't even like take a second look. Like I thought of this as my K shade and didn't even look in my collection to see if I had any other K shades, because this is just my favorite. And I think that it would be my favorite shade within the palette. So it is the shade Kia. And it can be, when I first got this palette, like as a whole, this palette was so intimidating, and especially the Kia shade. But I absolutely love creating halo eyes using this palette and having Kia be the inner and outer color, and then using any other of the like shimmer metallic shades in here to do on the center. I just think it is such a beautiful pairing. Like no matter what you put it with, it is definitely a fan favorite for mine. Obviously it made it into the K spot. All right, so for the shade L, I feel a little bad. This palette is really new into my collection, but I just love this shade so much, and I don't have anything like it in my collection. So for L, I picked Luna from the ColourPop Sailor Moon palette. So Luna is just this really great, like intense, like icy blue purple kind of shade. It is so beautiful, and I cannot like wait to be able to play around with it more and get more creative with this palette. I've really been focusing a lot on my Pan Those eyeshadows, but I have used this palette like 2 to 3 times since it's come into my collection, and every time that I have used this palette, I have used the shade Luna. So it is definitely something that I am like really drawn to. I think it's really pretty. I think it would complement like a lot of people's eye color. That's like another thing about it, is that I feel like some shades look better on others depending on our eye colors, but Luna is just one of those like almost universal shades where I think like it would just make any eye color pop. Okay, so for the letter M, we have a shade from the Menagerie Killer Purr palette. This is a really great just like staple mustard yellow brown shade. I feel like that and the greens, they play so nicely together, and for me in my collection, having those like grungy olive colors is a staple, and so having a shade like this is a staple as well. I forgot to say the name. It's the letter M, and it's the shade name Maine. This like whole palette is like Savannah Safari, like lion kind of inspired. Words, Haley. Anyway, though, I really do just love these types of colors, and this was like a particular shade within my collection that I didn't, like I had a void for it. So this palette has helped like fill in some of those like areas where I felt like I was lacking. And that shade in particular is the standout shade in that palette for me. And it's really funny because it is a matte shade. Like I feel like typically when we like think of our favorite shades or we do something like this, like we think like, oh, I'm gonna pick like a shimmer or a metallic or a glitter or something like really interesting. So I do think it's really eye-opening to see like how many mattes made it in here, and not only like how I said, like I was forced into a little bit with the Jezebel shade just because I don't have a lot of J names. So not counting something like that, but where like with M, there are a ton of eyeshadows that I have that start with the letter M, and that matte shade is what I was like, nope, that is my favorite. So I just think that's really interesting. Okay, so for the letter N, we have the Kaleidos Sapphire Green palette, and I picked the shade Nuclear, which is this nice, like intense gold color. Now, it's a bit of a different gold from the one from the Juvia's Place, the Warrior palette. The Warrior palette almost has more, it's like a deeper kind of gold shade, but this one is more of like a true gold, I would say, like when you compare them together. But I absolutely love this. I love just this palette as a whole. I think this is my favorite like Kaleidos palette that I have. So yeah, that was an easy one to pick. For O, we are going to reach back into the Festival palette. So the shade that I picked from this is Odagu right here, and I'm sorry guys if I'm like butchering any of these names. I'm trying my best to like pronounce them appropriately, but it's this shade right here. It's kind of like a really unassuming shade, but I think it's a really pretty like inner corner highlight. It's not the brightest. Like it's actually kind of dark, and especially for like your inner corner, but it's not like super dark. I don't know. It's an interesting, almost like peachy silver kind of shade in my opinion, but I do think that it has like a very good like spot within this palette. I think it helps to ground the palette, and it is really pretty as an all over the lid shade, so I do love that. All right, so for the letter P, we are dipping into the Kaleidos Shishimi City palette. Now, the letter P, oh, how am I gonna do this? Because a Panthers eyeshadow shade is in here. Let's hold it like this maybe so I can cover it. So the letter P gave me a run for my money because this like white gold shade here is Penthouse, and then the other shimmer within this palette, the pink one, is Pink Ginger. And I, for the longest time, like I sat here for maybe like 10 or 15 minutes trying to decide which one of those was my favorite P shade. Like I knew it was definitely one of them, but I ended up going with Penthouse, the white gold kind of shade, because it's a surprising shade. Like in the pan, I feel like it does look like a white gold and it has like a little bit of a pink shift to it. But it's one of those shades that depending upon what you pair it with, it's actually so much more diverse than you think. If I wear it with something that falls more in like the green color story, it takes on like a green shift. If I wear it with something that's more in the pink family, it takes on that pink shift. If I wear it with something that is more of like a blue purple, that's the shift that shows up with it. I don't know how they did that. Like I don't know what sorcery that is, but it is just a beautiful shade, hands down. All right, so for the letter Q, we are gonna dip into the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette. I'm gonna show it to you upside down because like the mirror is easier to cover if I hold it this way. But it is the shade Queen here that I picked. And it's such a pretty, like it's really dark. Usually I don't gravitate towards these darker shimmers. But again, some of these letters you're kind of forced into because I don't have a lot of shade names that start with the letter Q. But this shimmer is actually really interesting in that it like has kind of a like yellow undertone to it. I don't know how well that picks up in camera or on the swatch, but I feel like when I wear it, it definitely does have a yellow undertone, which is fitting because it comes from this palette. But due to it having that kind of an undertone, I don't ever feel like it's too dark on my lids. I'm actually quite comfortable wearing it. So I really do enjoy that shade just as a whole. Obviously, it made it into the Q spot. All right, for R, we are gonna dip back into the Sci-Fi Green palette. I love that some of these palettes like have multiple shades from them in like this. Like it just shows that like obviously that's like a fan favorite palette for me at least. So for R though, I picked the shade Radioactive, which I feel like when a lot of people talk about this palette, that this shade in particular is like their like least favorite or like just could have done without kind of shade, I guess. But I really love it. I think this is such like a grounding shade for this palette. Like I think it was definitely needed. It's like the main shade from the Killer Purr palette, where these like more, this one leans more orange, whereas the main shade leans more mustard yellow. But both of those types of shades I think are staples when working with like olivey greens and golds. And I just really think that this palette would not feel as complete as it does if it were missing that shade. Okay, S was another one that gave me like a run for my money. I had multiple shades where I was like, this, no, this, no, this. But when I like narrowed it down a little bit more, I got to like my top 3. I just kept telling myself like, Haley, you know it's got to be this shade. Like this shade, 1, it just screams you. 2, you love wearing it. I have it on today because like I said, my eye look comes from this palette. But for S, I chose the shade Sponsored right here, which in the pan, I feel like it just looks like a kind of like emerald green color. And that is very true, but it's a shifty shade. It's like a duochrome. So it shifts from like a blue brown to that emerald green, and it is so pretty. I so love wearing it. I have it on today in the center of my lids, but I don't know like how well you can tell because I'm kind of far back from the camera, but I just love wearing this shade. And when I first got this palette, I felt like Sponsored didn't really mesh well with the palette as a whole. But the more that I've pulled this out and like played with it, I have come to find that Sponsored really does play nicely with everything in this palette. Like this palette, when I first got it, to be fair, didn't scream like really cohesive to me. And it was like a little bit intimidating and like outside of my comfort zone, but the more that I have played with it, the more comfortable I've gotten with it, and the more that I can like see and appreciate that it is a standalone like palette in its own right. All right, for the letter T, this was like a super easy shade. It was one of those, it was like Kia, the K shade, where I just knew it off the top of my head. Like I didn't even look at other T shades. So it comes from the Kaleidos Electro Turquoise palette. And I have to say, all of you guys that think this looks like old school 90s Taco Bell, yes, you are definitely right. That is exactly what I thought of when I first saw this palette. So I'm glad to know that other people share my same wavelength. But the T shade that I picked is this shade Tron right here, and you can see like I have a nice dip in it. Like, who is this? Who is Haley playing with blue shades? But this shade is such an interesting blue. I don't have anything like it in my collection. I've never seen anything like it in any other eyeshadow palette. It is like this pretty like Caribbean ocean blue color, but it also has like some silverness to it, and it's just so pretty. It pairs so nicely with so many things, and it's a shade that I really like wearing all times of the year. Like it's not just like a summer shade. Like I feel like this palette does, since it has like those oranges and blues, like you think of it more as like a spring summer palette, but no, like that blue shade alone is sold me on this palette, which I know you shouldn't just like get something for one shade, but that shade, and it just works so nicely with like any time of year and any time of look. So all right, so for you, I was forced into this. So if I didn't have a shade name that started with the letter, then I just picked something that was like kind of close. Like, so for instance with X, I don't have a shade that starts with the letter X, so I picked a shade called Extra. Like, and I thought that was going to be the case with you, that I would just have to do some kind of like gymnastics like that with it, but I actually have one shade that starts with the letter U, so I put it in here. It is my favorite U shade simply because it is my only U shade, but it does come from the Festival palette. Who's counting on how many shades came from this palette? Because I did not. But the shade I picked is, well, the shade that was picked for me kind of is Uli right here, which is this white shade. And I really do like this shade. Like, it's not a dud shade. It's not like an unfavorite shade. So it wasn't like, I say like I was forced into it, but it is like a pretty shade. Like, I'm not sour about picking it as my U shade. But it's just, it has like this interesting like pink kind of purple shift to it, and I think again it's just one of those shades where it really makes sense within this palette. It's really pretty as an inner corner highlight. I have not yet tried it as an all over the lid shade, but I am curious to pair it with especially the pink shade and see how that goes. So all right, so for V, I chose a shade from Dandelions, and I've never had this happen. Like, their mattes are really soft and like kind of on the more powdery side, which doesn't bother me. But like, so it's a single from them, and I had it in this little palette. I haven't dropped the palette or anything like that. But when I opened it up, like this shade had like crumbled out. That's really weird. I've never had that happen before. But anyway, the shade, so it's gonna look a little funny in the pan, but I chose the shade Vex from Dandelions. It is like this great blue purple shade, which typically I'm not into those. I feel like they make me really sickly. Just more of it fell out on the floor. Like, what is going on? That's kind of weird. I feel like usually these like blue purple shades make me look really sickly, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the like exact combination of how much blue to how much purple that is in this shade, but I really do love it. I love pairing it with Glass Bull. I love pairing this shade with the ABH Jackie Aina palette. Like, it's really become like a fan favorite shade for me. And when I bought it, it came in their 9-pan Glam and Groove bundle set, and it was this shade and then another shade in that set, Livid, were two that I was like, I don't know, like, you probably really don't need those, but it's like a better deal to get the bundle. So, but I am happy that I went ahead and got that bundle because I do enjoy this shade. So let me clean up all this mess now. All right, I tried to save as much as I could out of the Vex shade so that I can repress it, but that's neither here nor there. Let's move on to W. So it's another Dandelion shade, and this is the shade, I don't know exactly how to pronounce this, so I'm just gonna leave it on the screen for you guys, but it is like it's another white shifty shade, much like the Uli shade, but I feel like this one has almost like a blue purple shift to it, whereas the Uli shade was definitely more of like a pink shift to it if you're looking at them together. So I really do enjoy this shade. I think it's very pretty. Again, I haven't really tried it as like a total lid shade. I've used it mostly as like an inner corner highlight, but it is really pretty for that purpose. All right, so moving on to X. Like I said, I don't have a shade name that starts with the letter X, so I went with this shade because it is called Extra. So it comes from the BH Avocado Toast palette. Are we surprised that we're dipping back into here? It is this really pretty, like, I don't know, kind of like emerald green color. It does remind me of Sponsored from the Jackie Aina palette. However, this one does not have a shift. So it's just a standard, like what you see is what you get in the pan. Like there's not going to be that interesting like shift to it. Why do I like repeat myself so often? Either way, I really do enjoy this shade, even though it's like on the darker side. I think it's really pretty, and it's almost like, it's so foiled that even though it's dark, it almost is like lighter than what you expect, if that makes sense. Like it's not like I feel like sometimes when you put like, let's say a brown or red shimmer on your lid, like it's there, and it can be dimensional. Like I'm not saying it can be flat, but it's there and it's dark. Like, but this shade, even though it is like a dark emerald green shade, the way the light hits it almost makes it a little bit lighter and brighter. So I really do enjoy this shade. All right, so for shade Y, we are going to dip into the Urban Decay Naked 2 palette. I didn't have that many Y shade names, but this shade YDK, I really do enjoy it. And in the pan, it looks much darker than it does actually like on the eyes. I find that this is like, if you own Snake Eyes by ColourPop, or you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. Snake Eyes to me is like a great like pink taupe color. This shade YDK is that, but like darker, but it's still really pretty and I still really love it. It's also one of those shades where it's a great shimmer to put on the outer V and like blend into your crease, and it just kind of like transforms almost any eye look by doing that. So again, I like it as a lid shade, but it's also really pretty like in the crease or the outer V. All right, last letter, Z. It comes from the ABH Jackie Aina palette. So I can't remember off the top of my head if I have any other Z shades in my collection. If I do, there's not very many. But this shade is one that I really do enjoy. I love it. It's a little bit like deceiving because in the pan it looks a little bit lighter than it actually applies to on your lids. But it is the shade Zam right here. And I really do, don't get me wrong, it is a pretty like peachy kind of gold shade. Like it's not a standard like traditional true gold, but it is like in its own right, like it falls into that gold family, and I really do enjoy using this. I did one time use it as like an inner corner highlight, and it is too dark for that, so don't make that mistake. But as a lid shade, this is just really pretty, and it's like, it's one of those shades where you can just throw something simple into your crease, put this on your lids, and you look like you put a lot more effort into your eye look than you did. So I really like that. All right, we made it through the whole alphabet. Thank you guys so much. I hope that you enjoyed this. I think it was a lot of fun. I still do want to do like my favorite shade and my least favorite shade from every palette. So that'll probably be coming up sometime in 2021. But I just thought this was, you know, fun, like I said. So if you want to do it and you do like post it somewhere, let me know down below, because I'm always like interested to see everyone else's takes on like the same kinds of things. So, but yeah, check out the description box for like the creator of the A to Z challenge and things like that. And I just thank you guys so much, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.